To give you an idea of the esteem in which our speaker today is held, let me list just a few of the roles he has played. National co-chairman of the Clinton-Gore campaign, vice chairman, Democratic Leadership Council, chairman, National Governors Association, co-chairman, Democratic Platform Committee, and chairman of the Democratic Governors Committee, to name a few. Education has always been at the core of his interests, both as a political and governmental leader, and he has won several awards and widespread acclaim for his work in this area. He is currently, for example, the chair of the National Educational Goals Panel and co-vice chair of Achieve, an effort by America's governors and major corporate leaders to reform education by establishing national standards and assessments. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to welcome to the City Club of Chicago the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Roy Romer. Mr. Chairman.
I know we want to get into issues real quick, but I gotta tell a quick story, and it's a true story. I was president of the student body back in 1950 at Colorado Aggies, now Colorado A&M. And we always elected a homecoming queen by voting in the morning of homecoming day, and as president of the student body, it was my job to announce the queen. So 3 students counted the ballots. They came up the first half, running up the stairs and said, "Here's the queen." I went down at halftime. 5 beautiful young ladies came across, and I crowned one queen. I sat down in the stands. Second half began. Another student came running up the stairs, leaned over and said, "My God, Romer, you crowned the wrong queen." And I want you to know why I took up the career of politics, because my next sentence was, "How many people know?" And they said, "The 3 who counted and you." And if you know what kind of a issue that is on campus, this is absolutely true. I said, that egg has been fried. And we lived with that decision. About a year later, I began to date one of those young women. And about a year later, I married her. And about several years into the marriage, I remember 2 children into that marriage. It was at a candlelight dinner with my wife. And I had never really discussed this. And I thought, now's the time. So I began the conversation. And I said, "B, I didn't tell you everything that I should have when we were married." And she put her fork down, looked at me, and said, "Oh?" And then I told this story. And I just want to tell you, you ever get in that situation, bury it. Bury it. Bury it. I'd like to introduce my wife, B. Romer. B, stand. We've been married 40-some years, and we have 7 children and 17 grandchildren so far. Now, the so far applies to the grandchildren, okay? I want to really get into this subject. It's fun to do this speech today. This is a bipartisan crowd, I know it. It's not often we get a chance to sit back and just reflect on this business of public policy. Let's begin historically. I'm a farmer. I came from a small town. I'm a part of a kind of a frontier culture out there in eastern Colorado. This nation had a period of expansion. It was an agricultural revolution. You remember those days. The railroads were a part of it. They came through Chicago. There was a set of policies that grew around that revolution. The land-grant college system, rural electrification, you know all those policies that related when this was an agriculturally oriented nation. Then we had a new revolution. It was called the Industrial Revolution. And again, this community was very much a part of it. But it demanded a new set of national responses. You remember those responses: child labor laws, Social Security, workers' comp, minimum wage, antitrust. There was a set of policies that were appropriate for that age. Folks, we are in another revolution. It is so fast-moving. It's unbelievable. You just pick up the paper any day. I'm from Denver. You know, AT&T, Omar Bell, bought that Maverick TCI. Can you believe that? Quest, that little agent, you know, the little thing that started out there, is now a major player. 3Com is located its, level 3, located its world headquarters in Denver. Technology is driving this new revolution. It's a technological revolution, and it is massive. Its impact on our lives is difficult to comprehend, but it brings, again, to public policy and to politics a new challenge, and that is, what are the policies? What are the policies and the politics that fit this new age? I have a son who is a renowned economist, Paul Romer, Stanford, and I've learned a lot from him about how technology, as it affects growth. But certain things are clear. We're in a global economy. And the most clear thing of all is that that economy is now not going to be dictated by resource base, which was the prior history of this country. That economy will be dictated by skill levels, knowledge, and new ideas. That's what's going to drive this world. Therefore, if we're going to have a national economic policy, education policy makes sense, and other policies, we need to be very reflective. Now, when the people walk into the polls this fall, they're going to have about 5 or 7 questions on their mind. Let me tell you what they are. 1, economic. Which party or which candidate can do the best job of keeping this economy healthy and allow me to get a better job than the one I got? Secondly, which of these 2 parties can help my children get a better education than I had at their age and help re-educate me because I got to have new skill? Third, health. Which of these parties can get me access to health care that I understand and can afford and I need? Fourth, which of these 2 parties is going to be able to have a healthy economy and a healthy environment? Because if you're from any state as beautiful as Illinois or Colorado, you want to keep it beautiful. Fifth, which of these 2 parties is going to allow me to be a player, even if there's a good economy out there? If I'm black or if I'm brown or if I'm female or if I'm gay, I want to have access to that table of the good life. I want to be included. What are you doing about including us? Sixth, crime. Which of these parties is going to keep my streets safe, my family safe? Seventh, seniors. Which of these 2 parties is going to let me retire with dignity and have Social Security cured when I need it? Now, those are the kind of gut questions that are going to drive people's votes this fall. Now, I want to take you through not all of those questions, but about the first 3, because I think there's a real difference between these 2 political parties. So let's start down that list. Economics. I got to tell you, as a Democrat, I could not be more proud than to be a part of a political party that has become the fiscal conservative party of this nation. It blows me away. It blows me away. I for years, been trying to defend this party against that I thought unfair attack of tax and spend. Now, I stand with other Democrats on the high ground of fiscal conservatism. Let me tell you, we had to balance this budget. We had to do that in order to get sound financial base in which we can invest in the future. Interest rates are down and they're stable. Investors know kind of the ground rules. This president and the Democrats in Congress have had a 3-legged stool on economics. One is fiscal responsibility. The second is making the right kind of investments in that cut-down budget. And third, opening trade with the world, open markets globally. Now, any good economist will tell you that's the right ground. Now, I can't take a lot of time to expand that, but I tell you, I think this president and Democratic Party that supports him is very correct in saying whatever surplus we have, we got to keep it. We got to keep it to solve Social Security first. Now, those of you in this room are smart enough to know we don't even have a surplus. You know that. We only got a surplus because they add in Social Security receipts with the general revenues. Now, it's kind of like I'm a farmer. In a good year, what do? You take your good times and you reinvest in your ability to produce the next year. You repair your barn and you get a new tractor. In good times like this, we ought to take those good times and prepare ourselves for the future. Now, in contrast, what do I see in the Republican Party? And I'm not trying to just be spinning issues here or blindly partisan. But the facts are, the Republican Party is trying to say, I want to take that surplus, so defined, and at one, they were going to give it all back in tax cuts. Now Newt says, just give half back. Folks, that's the wrong fiscal policy. Anybody that's got their head screwed on right will tell you that. Now, secondly, what have they done? You well know how we're tied into a global market. IMF is a tremendously important institution. We're trying to get it funded. And the Republican Party is playing abortion politics with IMF. That's just dead wrong. They ought not do that. Third, income tax code. You well know we needed to revise that system. But to abolish that code in advance before you get a substitute for it, how many in this room have a business that's based upon certain guidelines? Anybody in the housing business here? Anybody in the mortgage market business here? I have a state. The whole income base of my state's tied to that Internal Revenue Code. That's reckless fiscal action for a Republican Party to try to abolish that code in advance. So I just want to lay it on the table. We're looking at the new century. We're looking at a new technological revolution. We need economic policies that make sense. Who would have thought those rascals called Democrats would be claiming the high ground on fiscal responsibility? But that's where we are. And I just say to you, for your own self-interest, you ought not support a party or candidate that want to play election-year politics by trying to give you a tax cut out of the federal treasury. Now, let's move from economics to how do we prepare education and knowledge-wise for this next generation. The most important issue to me is education. I've spent most of my life at it. But you got to look at it in 3 tiers. 1, the years 0 to 6, 2nd, K to 12, and 3, beyond high school. I spent 50% of my State of the State message last year on 0 to 6. You all know the new science of the brain. You can be so programmed by the time you're 6, you can never get out of that track. It is crucial what happens to the very young. You put a patch over a kitten's eye at a certain 2-week stage of its development, take the patch off, the kitten's eye is perfectly physically good, cat's blind. You know why? The brain cells that were genetically programmed to do that eye have gone elsewhere. Same thing that happens with children. Now, there is a difference between these two parties in terms of that issue. I remember when the first welfare bill hit the president's desk, had no child care in it at all for those welfare families going to work. He vetoed it. We finally got that back in the bill. That's the right thing. There's a difference between these two parties when Head Start appropriations came up. And I just believe that as people go into that voting booth this fall, they're going to remember 2 images. One, we got a Republican Party that's out there trying to start another investigation and to be known as the party of investigation. We got a Republican Party that's trying to move from the right to the far right. Remember Trent Locke saying homosexuality is one of the major issues in the next 10 years? You got that image, and then you got a Democratic Party that stumbles at times, but it's working on the right issues. It's saying we got to solve the problem of how we prepare ourselves economically, educationally, health-wise, environment-wise, and inclusion for that next technological revolution. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I want to come back and talk about the president and his current week, but I tell you, that's not going to be the issue this fall. The issue this fall are people going to walk in that booth and say, who can help me better educate my child? And that's where their vote's going to go. I talked about 0 to 6. K-12, I think you all know, you've done a great job in Chicago. But there are certain things we need to do. We need to raise the standards. We need to do more accurate measurement. That's a conservative principle, you know that, but that's where Democrats are. Third, we need to be sure that our text materials are aligned to that new standard. Fourth, we need to be sure our teachers are trained to be able to deliver to that new standard. Fifth, we've got to organize the time within our school day, and school week, and school year so that kids have the time and the opportunity to learn to those new standards. And we've got to make special time available for those who are behind. Sixth, we got to get parents involved. And we got to give them more choice within the public school system, charter schools and other techniques. Seventh, we got to have the community pay attention. I hope people who hire begin to say, I want to see your high school certificate, and I want to see what you accomplished, or else you can't get this job. There are ways in which we can bring people along. But that is a tough, tough love in education, and we can do that. Now, the president's trying to do what he can at the national level. He worked very hard for standards and assessments, got some Republican flack over that. It became an ideological issue, and it's kind of off the table now. He's trying to bring more teachers to America, 100,000 new teachers. That's a good idea. He and Carol Moseley Brown and others are trying to do something about repairing school buildings. That's an important agenda. Let's move to education beyond high school. When that president put that budget together and said, we're going to balance it, he made some crucial decisions on what you invest in. And one of the things he said, we're going to give a targeted tax cut to enable some people to send their kids to college who otherwise wouldn't be able to get them there. That was a very important public policy issue. Now look, Democrats are not all right. We don't always have the right side of the issue. But on this educational issue, I welcome the competition of the Republican Party. Several years ago, their mantra was, we need to abolish the Department of Education. Now I think they're getting the message, primarily from Republican governors. And they're saying, wait a minute, we got to get back in this fray. That's healthy for this country. We ought to debate that out in this campaign. And in Illinois, you ought to look very carefully about which candidates are on what side of that issue. I think Glenn Pichard has got an educational background. I spent the morning with him. I'm absolutely convinced he is going to be a very strong candidate for governor in this state. So, issues of economics, education, let me take a third one, health. You know, you just can't be a well-trained, well-skilled individual unless your body functions. I got to tell you, one day, Bee and I were in the mansion, and it has marble floors. One of our grandchildren slipped and hit his head and had a knot on his head about the size of my fist. I and the parents of that child rushed over to the emergency room at a hospital nearby, and we got that child cared for. And as I sat in that emergency room, as you well know, governors don't have problems getting their grandchildren cared for. But I thought, what in the world would happen here if I was poor and black and I came in and they say, hey, you know, it doesn't come under your health care plan. In fact, you don't have one. Now, let me say, this issue of an HMO Bill of Rights, Patient Bill of Rights, is a very important issue. It's got to be done properly. I think all of you know there are times in which you can over-regulate. You can regulate in the wrong way and you can screw up market forces. But there are some corrections we need to make. And the Democrats came forward and said, we're going to do that. The Republicans initially said, no, we're against it all. I think they came back and said, after reflection, no, wait a minute, we read the polls, we're for it, but not so much. We're for only a third of that coverage, not all of it. Well, that debate needs to continue, but I just think it is important ground, and the Democratic Party, I'm proud that it's trying to continue to push to extend available, affordable health care to all in this country. I'm from Colorado. Costs you $50 or more to get a good ski ticket there. And yet I got 150,000 kids in my state that don't have health coverage. I'm embarrassed. We, in our affluent culture, can afford to do that. But it's not just an act of generosity, it's an act of investment in the future potential of a community and an economy. Well, I just want to tell you that, let me summarize where I'm coming from and where I'm going. This is a time in which we need to think. We need to think new ways, new ideas. We need this in both political parties. Government is a tool to enable a community or individuals to get access to something they couldn't get to without the government. It's not an instrument to substitute for family affairs or the private economy. But we ought to have a creative, critical thinking approach to it. We ought to think about that new revolution that's coming our way. And I just want to lay out those three issues: the economy, education, and health. I want to mention one more, and that's the inclusion issue. Let me tell you, let's go back to my situation trying to get in that emergency room in the hospital. There's a whole lot of people in this country, in your community and mine, who have real talent, real skill, but are not able to exercise it because they're excluded. There's still prejudice among us. You know that. We need to work to get around it because, one, we need everybody's participation. Everybody ought to be pushing this wagon, not having to ride in it. And secondly, it's the right thing to do. I'm going to wrap this up and get to your questions. But I've been trying to lay out what a challenge there is in this country. I've been trying to lay out what those issues are, and that those are the ones that are going to be on the ballot box and in people's mind. I'm trying to lay out the contrast and the difference between these two political parties. I have two more things to say. I've been watching the Republican Party quite closely. I've been trying to figure out their strategy because it's part of my work. And they, I think, are thinking this way. In fact, they're not only thinking, they're talking openly this way. One, this is a low turnout election. Therefore, we need to energize our base. You've heard that, right? Two, how do we energize our base? We attack the president, and we keep investigating, and at the same time, we move to the right. And they've been doing that. In my own state, there was a Republican representative named Tamber Williams, first-termer, moderate Republican, Greeley, Colorado. She went back to her community to run for re-election. She couldn't even get on the ballot. Her Republican Party in her county wouldn't even put her back on the ballot. You know why? It was taken over by the religious right. And they had a mantra. She didn't pass the litmus test. She had to go out and walk precincts in order to even get on the ballot. Let me tell you, I think the Republican Party is making a mistake in saying this election is going to turn on its base and keep going further to the right and be more of attack mode. And you know why? Because I think that there is always that moderate middle that is saying, where do I find a party that represents me? There's a whole lot of people I know who are Republicans in suburbia who are saying, wait a minute, how did we get to the point where the Democrats represent my economic philosophy of conservatism? How did we get to the point where Democrats are saying, we got to have a global economy and we're for IMF without abortion? How did we get to the point where we have these ideological issues screwing up the budget process in Congress? How did we get to the point where the senior leader, Republican leader in the United States Senate, has a press conference saying homosexuality is one of the major issues of our time? Now, look, folks, I'm just trying to tell it the way I see it. I'm trying to tell it straight. We got such great possibilities in this country. But we're not going to get there unless we are smart and thoughtful and courageous and get there. And you can tell, you can put it in one word. It's the development of our human potential. And I can talk about this in public terms, or I can talk about it in very private and personal terms, any one of those 17 grandchildren. Do you know what I'm going to be thinking about the last week of my life? It's not how many dollars I got in my bank account or how many shoes I got in my closet. It's what opportunity I left to those I had some responsibility with to have the life they were born to live. Now, let me speak about the president before I close. The president, I think, has been very direct with us. He has said, you know, in recent days, that I made a mistake. It was a bad mistake. He said it was a terrible failure in judgment. He has said, I'm responsible for that, and I take responsibility for it. He has said, I regret it. He said, I misled people, even my wife. That's a quote. This is a person who is saying, I did something wrong. I'm human, but I did it wrong. And I'm responsible for it. And I'm saying to the people, again, I'm quoting him, I'll do anything within my power to make it right. And he's in the process of doing that this week, working with his own family. Now, that's a very human situation. Which one of us in this room has not, in our own past, had some circumstance in which we felt embarrassed about, and we knew we had done wrong? That's where this president is. And I think he's doing the right thing. Now, that process needs to follow its course. That investigation needs to report to Congress and needs to have a nonpartisan judicial review of it and do what you have to do. But we got a nation here, and we need to get this behind us. We have a president who has unusual gifts. I know him personally. He has done a very good job. He has given us the possibility to be not only an economy that is, I think, unusual in history, but he has given us an opportunity to include people, and I think he's set the right tone in many public policy issues. We need to get this issue behind us so that we can get back onto the business of America, and we will do that. We will do that. That's where the American people are this morning. They're saying, we understand that is a bad mistake. And we understand it needs to take its course in terms of whatever happens in terms of a person dealing with that and a family dealing with that. But also, we're a nation. We're a nation that stands on the threshold of greatness. And we got some very crucial issues in front of us. The next 3 or 4 weeks, this president has got to go to Russia. Now, let me tell you, we got a lot at stake in what happens in Russia. Do you remember the Cold War? We don't want that economy to collapse and have that back confronting us again. We got a real serious crisis in the Far East in terms of the economy. We need to have this president helping us solve those problems, and he will be there helping us solve those problems. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. You don't sweep this under the rug. You look at it, you stare it right in the face, and you say, that's what humanness means, at least in that particular individual. And you say, let's get beyond it. And I think that we as a nation can get beyond it. But in getting beyond it, it means that we got a very important election coming up. And when people walk into that voting booth, I've been asked all morning, is this going to affect the election? Is this going to do this or that? No. You know why? People are too smart for that. People who've got children and grandchildren like I have and Bee have, they're going to say, what are the right decisions we need to make as a community called the United States to set the condition for the next 10, 20, 30 years? And we're going to know we need somebody who is fiscally responsible. We need to have somebody who's willing to invest in the future of our skills and our knowledge and our ideas. We need to have somebody who's helping us, and some party or some candidate who's helping us lead into the right kind of health care and the right kind of environmental protection, the right kind of inclusion, the firmness on crime, and the solution to our problems in retirement. That's what's going to turn these elections. Let me close with just one simple story. There was a farmer, Iowa. He always won the prize at the county fair for having the best corn, year after year. But every year when he'd win, he'd immediately give his best seed to his neighbors. People came to him and said, Jones, why do you do that? When you win the prize, why do you give your best seed away? He says, look, you don't understand how corn grows. That pollen floats from field to field. And if my neighbor grows better corn, my corn gets better. If my neighbor grows poor corn, my corn is poor. What's good for my neighbor is good for me. Thank you very much. Sure, I'd love to take questions.
We're going to have questions, and James Licklider, our executive director, has a hand microphone. So please, when you want to ask questions, signal him and give your name at the hand microphone, please. I think I'll take the first question. On the way in, Senator Tom Daschle was quoted on National Public Radio as indicating not only his concern that he felt he was misled by the president, but speculating openly as to whether or not, and we will see, he said, whether or not this president can govern and if he can gain the support of the Congress to really adhere to his word and believe his word. Do you have any doubt that the president can continue to govern?
I do not. I think he can continue to govern, but I think it's obvious that he did mislead. He himself said that. He said that word. And I think that is a terrible error. And he needs to get beyond that. And I think the way he gets beyond that is to get back on the agenda. And I think, obviously, you don't heal that kind of a thing overnight. It takes some time. But again, this country is a country of forgiveness. You know, that's our ethic. There's original sin out there. It began, you know, in the Garden of Eden, and we lied about it then. You know, there's a forgiveness in this country, and we can do that. And we need to do that because there's a lot at stake for all of us. I think we will do that. We'll get this behind us.
Okay, James, you want to go over to that gentleman?
Yes, I'm Pat Giordano. You talked about putting this behind us, and certainly I think the majority of the public would like to see that. But the reality is that the investigation is going ahead, that there will be a report to Congress, and I have not heard yet the Democratic strategy for putting this episode behind us in the reality of the fact that the report will go to Congress.
Yeah. As you can tell, I'm not here as a spin artist. This has got to go to Congress. And I think Congress should handle it in a non-political fashion. I hope that they do. We all need it to have that handling. And I think that when it goes to Congress, decisions need to be made. If there are any other facts than what we know now, they need to be considered. But assuming the facts that are there now, you need to make the decision, what kind of action does this need? And there are a variety of things. I personally feel that this does not deserve impeachment. I don't think it rises to that level. I think that that in terms of your question as a strategy, I think we need to think in two ways. Serious mistake, an admission of error, a painful admission. Let's recognize we're all human. Let's recognize the gifts of leadership this man has, and let's get it there and handle it and go on. Now, I'm not trying to say this is analogous, but look, we did this with Newt Gingrich, didn't we? Newt had an ethics investigation, and there was a resolution of that, and there was a way in which he paid the penalty that he had to pay. You all remember that, $300,000, I believe it was, and he's back leading. Now, isn't that a point? Let's remember, one of the things I think is just the bottom core of this, those of us in public life are no more perfect than those of you who are not in public life. We all have the capacity to err. And you almost ought to expect us to err. But it's what we do with that is the important thing. And I think there's an orderly way in which you have this thing done. It ought to be done quickly. And let me say one other thing. I have not mentioned Ken Starr to this point, because it's a problem when you begin to mention it. And I was just trying to say, hey, there's a mistake here. We need to admit that. There is also an appropriateness about how you run an investigation, and I think and I hope Mr. Starr will close this up and get it in there. There were 2 or 3 things that happened in the course of that investigation. I used to prosecute that make me a little worried, but I don't want to get into that today because people misunderstand that. I remember the day that they first kept Monica in a hotel without letting her call her lawyers and said, will you wear a wire for us? Do you follow what I mean? Now, please help me draw the line. I'm not trying to add that as any excuse. Do you follow me on that one? There's just an appropriateness about how we save the institution of the presidency and how we save the capacity of people to investigate others who need investigation. I think we need restraint on both sides.
Next question.
Thank you. Luke Townsend. Just an observation and a question. In the original Gate fiasco, President Nixon apparently authorizes a burglary of the vice president's chief of staff to go to prison for cover-up. Then there's Contragate with President Reagan apparently having no knowledge of guns for hostages. And I was thinking, isn't it a bit hypocritical for the Republican Party to try to resurrect the memory of Nixon as being a great statesman and to continue to hold on a high pedestal the administrations of Reagan, given those incredible flaws in the operation of their policy and their governmental responsibilities, as opposed to Mr. Clinton's lapse in his moral, if you will, personal life. Some perspective is what I'm going to suggest.
Yeah. I want to be thoughtful as I answer that question. I think that it's dangerous in a way to start comparing one incident to another. I think there are different contexts and different acts, and I therefore would not make that comparison. I just think that we need not to try to make politics out of this issue. Now, that's an interesting statement because we're so political in this country. But I'm a governor. I'm here, serving my party. I tell you, there are certain things that are more important to me than partisanship. You know what I mean? And one of them is the institutions of this country, including the presidency, and the other is the ability of having confidence in their public officials. And we need to work this through. I think we can work it through. I think we can know that there are times in which we do the wrong thing, and there are ways in which we need to change institutional procedures to prevent that. But there's also a healing in this country. And this is a time we need to heal. And I'm trying to say, on my part, I want to be a part of that healing, and I don't want to overstate the case on a partisan basis.
David Burton. Governor, I'm also concerned with the institution of the presidency, partisanship aside.
Yeah.
The other night, the president indicated he had a critical lapse of judgment And this was a critical lapse of judgment that lasted over a lengthy period. I'm concerned as a citizen that the president may have a critical lapse of judgment during a time of national crisis. And I'm not in favor of impeachment, but is there any recourse for the American public going forward from this place besides impeachment? Do you have any recommendation?
I did, and let me comment on it. You know, for every error, a lot of us know there needs to be punishment or consequences to the error. First, can you imagine the consequence that's going through the president's mind right now, in his heart? I mean, this is a very painful experience. I mean, as those of us who deal with law enforcement, you know, there are many ways that punishment comes, so that's the first one. I am trying to say that I think there are a number of other consequences that come out of this, but I think your question is, what is the way in which justice comes out of this circumstance, or fair consequences come out of this circumstance? I'd leave it to Congress. You follow what I mean? I just appeal that you wait and see what the facts are. We don't know.
Governor, I'd like to change the subject for the moment.
Thank you.
Your name, sir?
My name is Roland Brooks. Governor, could you give us an insight on how it seems nationally with the numbers of seats for the House? The Democrats are saying we could have a shot at taking back the House. And how does the Senate look in terms of the gaining numbers?
Okay, Roland, and that's a very old friend of mine. I think, let me give this answer before the last 10 days and now, okay? Before the last 10 days, and it's the same answer. Before the last 10 days, I would say there's a good chance that we can win back 11 seats, and I'll tell you why. I think people are so much smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. I think the nation is really smart in the way it votes. And I think they instinctively know that if they don't give their own children more education, the world isn't going to be right for the children or the parents. And I think that, therefore, they are focused on issues in this election. And I think the Republican Party has been giving us a break. I mean, they have been giving us a break saying, one, we're going to go further to the right, and two, we're going to have another investigation. They got 50 of them going now. And I just think that when you have this ordinary family, adults, walking into that polling booth, and they have this question, should I vote for a party that wants to be attacking the president, get another investigation, or further identify with the right, or do I want to vote for a party, sometimes flawed, that's working on that list of issues, education, the economy, keeping the surplus of Social Security? I think we win. Now, I think after this last 10 days, I think the answer is exactly the same. The American public are always fascinated in this kind of a story. When it comes to voting, you know, they're going to vote for what's in their interest. And I think they instinctively know it's the issues that count, and they're going to be back there saying to each candidate or each party, where are you on this list of issues that affect me and my family? Therefore, I think we'll do well this fall. Can I add one more honest thing to that one? The only thing that worries me is the money. You got to get your message out, and money is crucial. And we need to be sure that that the Democrats stay on the playing field. We never can raise as much as they can. That's a fact. But we got to have money, and unfortunately, that's another issue we ought to talk about someday at this meeting. I'm sure you've done it before. We need to reform the campaign finance of this country.
Governor, if I can, you're kind enough to let me bend your left ear.
Your name, sir?
Bend your left ear at lunch. I would. The question.
Left ear. I don't have a left ear. I'm from Colorado. I'm a moderate. Go ahead.
I would like to ask the question of education. And education funding in this state is in very serious circumstances. And I'm sure you're aware of Jonathan Kozol's book about savage inequalities, and he points the finger at trying to support education on the property tax. Have you done anything in Colorado that can apply at a national scale to help solve this problem that causes old people to abandon their homes and young people not to be able to afford them because of high property taxes due to
Yes.
how we fund education?
Yes. We have, over a period of years, moved a great deal of the expense of education off of property tax and onto general revenues of sales and income. And that needs to happen. Let me say, what so fascinates me is it is so obvious. You understand what I've said today more than any other thing? The future is based on skills, knowledge, and ideas. And that's education, education, education. It's the first and foremost policy we ought to be about. And yet it's often the last thing we budget for, and it's the most cobbled up thing we budget for. We need to change this. It takes real courage to do that. And we got some other problems. We got a 9-month school year. That's crazy. You know, that was adopted at the time that we had a frontier culture in which you need the kids to go farm in the summer. And we dump these kids out on the streets at 2:30 in the afternoon and in the summer, and they lose, they fall back from much of the gain that we otherwise made. There is a whole revolution that we need to have in education. That's why what you're doing in Chicago is so hopeful. Let me tell you what I think ultimately is going to drive education reform. You know what it is? It's employers. The high-tech industry right now, but the computer industry is so short of skills, they're asking us to change immigration laws to get people from abroad. There is such an inevitable push in this country, one from those who employ and those who are parents, to say, we got to change this. They're going to reach for those politicians that are willing to do that and have the guts to do that. And it takes guts. I mean, right now in Colorado, we got a surplus, and we got a limit constitutionally what we can spend. And we're returning a bunch of money. Well, I got an initiative on the ballot saying, it's bipartisan, let's take half of that and invest in education and highways. Now, I think that'll pass, but you got to go out and fight for it with the public. I got a candidate for governor, the Republican side, that says, nope, hey, you don't need that. In addition, we can cut the government 5%. Well, I've had Republican control of the budget in Colorado for 12 years. I haven't ever had a Republican House or Senate. They write the budget. Well, this is just election pandering, you follow? And I think that will be rejected. I hope it will be rejected. But you understand, it's appealing. It's appealing. I think if I heard something in Illinois, one of your candidates for governor said, the first thing I'm going to do is cut your taxes. Think about it. Can I make an announcement? The president just announced that he's returning to Washington because military strikes have been launched against terrorist positions in Afghanistan and Sudan. That's all we know. Just, you know, people hand me these notes during I speak.
Let me ask a question, Governor, that's not on politics, but it's on a very important issue to all of us, and especially in Colorado. John Benet Ramsey, give us your analysis of the confusion that was attendant, and I know you sort of weighed in and decided not to appoint a prosecutor, I believe.
It's one of the things I really love about this job. The Ramsey case, you've been following it. It was not handled correctly at the early stages of that case, the first day or two. I don't need to repeat all that. It was a local police miscalculation, and let me just not try to defend it. It has been, therefore, a very difficult case to get evidence that can lead to an indictment. Recently, there was a letter from a detective, 8 pages in length, complaining about the district attorney. That landed on my lap because I have the authority under certain conditions to replace DAs. There are a core of the best district attorneys in Colorado. 3 Democrats, 1 Republican in the Denver metropolitan area. I immediately got them together and I said, thoroughly review this, come back, and let's talk out what the alternatives were. They came back and we made the following conclusions. This case is on track to a grand jury quite soon. Secondly, we need to add some new prosecutorial talent, which we are doing. Third, to change the responsibility for the overall case would be a mistake. It would put it further behind. And therefore, I made the decision that no, I would not intervene, but yes, we would add some talent to the case. And that's where it is. But let me just say to you, it's a terrible, horrible crime. And we need to do everything we can within public policy to get a resolution of it. But I think some of you, many of you know, there are times in which you don't have the evidence that you need to finish a decision as to what happened.
Yes, Governor. My name is Anthony Cole. I'm the Vice President of Haymarket Center. We're a big drug treatment and alcohol treatment program here in Chicago. And a couple of things I just want to mention, and perhaps I consider it obviously to be a major public policy issue. We have a major problem with crime in our communities, and when you ask the public, they say crime is a big problem. You ask the chief of police across America, they say the major problem is crime, and most of that crime is drug-related. Look at what's going on with the prison system, fast-growing industry in Illinois and probably across the nation. It's prisons. It's mostly related to drug-related crimes. One of the concerns I have about this is that these people are addicts. They have a health problem, and when they are addicts and they cannot get into treatment, they will continue to use their drugs and do whatever is necessary to get those drugs because they are addicts, including committing crime, would lead them into prisons and jails, what have you. My concern is that we, every given day here in Chicago, I think most of the metropolitan areas in America, they have enormous waiting lists of people who are seeking treatment but cannot get into treatment immediately. And thus, they continue to commit crimes, and because they're criminals, they go to jail and prisons. I'm concerned, can we put this on the national agenda in its proper place so that we can do something about preventing these kind of problems as opposed to simply waiting till they come to their logical conclusion and end up in prisons at enormous cost to the taxpayers.
Yeah, okay, several dimensions of it. Yeah, it needs to be on the national agenda. One, it relates to importing drugs across borders and the enforcement of that. Two, it relates to a national program of consciousness raising about this problem. Three, it relates to capacity of local law enforcement. But four, treatment. And we need to understand that it is an addiction. It is a physical, mental problem. And the prison budget in Colorado is growing at 16% a year. 16% a year. I will have built more prison beds in the 12 years that I have been governor than all the governors of Colorado put together by a factor of 2. How would you like to have that on your tombstone? You know what I mean? We got a real problem here, and we need to get hold of it. And I tell you, it's complicated. It cannot be handled only by government. It has to be handled a whole lot by the community and the culture of the community.
Thank you very much. I think that winds it up. Good job.